All right, greetings. How you doing? This is chapter 8 from our NSCA Essentials to Personal Training textbook. This chapter focuses very much on exercise psychology, goal setting, and motivation. I will say this, we do spend a lot of time in our Kinesiology 223 course talking about psychology, goal motivation, etc. But this book does spend a little bit of time here, so we have to jump in for at least a couple presentations. So let's go ahead and get this going. A screen grab of the first page of the chapter right here for you. Let me get myself out of the way. Just the basics that we're going to go over is understanding the psychological benefits of exercise, working with a client for goal setting, recognize the value of motivation, and implementing some methods to motivate a client. We're really focused on the first three here, and we'll start off with what are the benefits? The benefits of working out and exercise just in general. You have reduction in stress levels overall. You have some antidepressive effects and some cognitive benefits. So if we were to break this out and we look at anxiety. Now we do have two main types of anxiety, one of which is state anxiety, the other is trait anxiety. And state anxiety, think of it in terms of like the situation and time and place, like where you are in the moment and what the environment is doing to cause maybe a stress event for you. Usually what you have is a response to this, and the response happens if you look at like the central nervous system, you have the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system, part of the autonomic nervous system, and it's the autonomic nervous system that drives that fight or flight. You can have either this kind of like apprehension to go ahead and take on a challenge because it's perceived as a threat. We're kind of hardwired for that, just for survival over just millennia of being able to survive on this planet. But what happens is you have a psychological arousal that pushes you into this fight or flight, meaning the the sympathetic or parasympathetic, respectively. And then when we look at like trait anxiety, the traits of the person, that's the way to think of it, where it's more specific to the person. It's how the person perceives the situation. And there's no doubt you may have two athletes, two clients, two people in physical therapy, depending on what your environment is, and they might look at a particular challenge differently, where one is very much highly stressed and it causes a fight or flight response, where the other person might look at the challenge in front of them and say, I got this. And so, it just depends upon their person's trait anxiety. And there's a myriad of different reasons why trait anxiety is different from person to person, which we'll not explore here, but you'll get into in other classes. With the two, you have to strike a balance as a trainer to be able to understand the person's trait anxiety and little things that are triggers for them, and perhaps find ways to manipulate the environment to not overstimulate the person and have high state anxiety. And no doubt about it, there's some reasons for both, but you have to be able to work in the context of a client. So the book does a pretty good job here of kind of explaining how effective exercise is to reduce depression and anxiety. I think we can all get on board with this in terms of how it's a benefit to people. I think when you look at it, though, the book will evaluate and present that it's actually a series or combination of modalities. And what they found is, in their literature review, is if we read through this paragraph here, small to moderate reductions in anxiety with physical activity have been consistently reported in exercise psychology literature for over 30 years. You can research those if you want. They're typically observed in aerobic forms. So what happens is they talk about doing aerobic activity, and it's across different intensities, different durations. And what they found is research provides that individuals who did a combination of resistance, flexibility, aerobic exercise, and they had a significantly greater reductions in their depression than individuals who only focused on aerobic exercise. So it's this exercise variety that is of benefit. And as we'll see later on, we talk a little bit more about how this variety actually benefits a person. So we look at this and go, okay, the book goes a little bit further to talk about some of the mechanisms that might be present in the relationship between the client and the trainer, to talk about how stress is introduced. And I always talk about, like, when we're trying to elicit a training response, we have to apply a training stimuli. And that training stimuli is a stressor on the body. but it's a matter of how that stressor is perceived by the person, right? If you go back to state and trait anxiety, and then how that stressor is processed by the person. So the book suggests that you want to foster an environment of task competency. It emphasizes like individual effort and mastery for the person. And you'd like to have this kind of environment you create where you have better relationship building with your client and better connectiveness with your client. You're not just like a didactic drill sergeant barking out orders. You're actually working with the client and helping them with their goals. And they note here that furthermore, studies have shown that youth and young adult groups exercise participants perceive being less stressed, and they produce less cortisol, which is a stress hormone, when they experience a caring, task-involving climate. So I would suggest that, we talked about like in class, like how you're able to work with your clients and engage with your clients. The overbearing drill sergeant will resonate with some, but I can tell you if you're kind of like a kinder, gentler ass whipping and you work with people and show them the bar and shove them over the bar and you're supportive and you're motivating and you're informative as to why people are doing it, you're doing certain things that are helping empower the person and also have a better understanding of the why you're doing certain things. We're doing this because this, and this. Eventually, it becomes a matter of the person has greater task competency, and also they end up having greater mastery of the skill, which is empowering in of itself to the person and helps reduce stress levels, because there's a relationship between how in control of a situation the person has and their levels of stress. So if you are able to actually impart a little bit of control and give the person a little bit of, if you will, the skill set to have task mastery, you're in essence reducing the overall stress levels for that person. Now, cortisol, if you can look up cortisol and weight gain if you'd like, it's kind of outside the scope here, but I can tell you that that stress hormone is pretty big in the literature in terms of how it affects our bodies. I'm going to go ahead and bring this to a pause. 1 second here. Okay, there we go. I just kind of had to move myself around a little bit here. When you look at exercise itself, exercise has several effects on the body, like cortisol being one of them, the stress levels that we just talked about. When we talk about the antidepressive side, you have serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine are kind of like your main three that they'll talk about in this chapter. Serotonin, this is kind of important for a quiz question down the road. Serotonin is an important neurotransmitter with antidepressant effects that are elevated during and after physical activity, both elevated during and after. And dopamine and its receptor binding sensitivity, thus reducing the likelihood of both depression and Parkinson's disease, which is super interesting when you look at it in terms of like how this exercise can affect serotonin, which can have a trickle-down effect to Parkinson's. There's also strong evidence that physical activity maintains dopamine, an essential neurotransmitter involved in the motor control process in the central nervous system. And they talk about how this neurotransmitter, this dopamine, is essential to the learning of motor skills and mental health, which also ties back a little bit to the Parkinson's, but more to like, if you will, individuals who might be in a memory care unit. When we look at levels of norepinephrine, it's another neurotransmitter. It's lower during bouts of depression, but are also increased with exercise. So what happens is during a bout of depression, that norepinephrine level drops. I don't know if that's a cart or the horse or which one it is. We can talk more about that perhaps in another class. But you have that lower neurotransmitter there. And then when you work out, it increases. And I think that's going to be your important takeaway with a quiz question somewhere down the road. So if we take this a step further, and we look at exercise in terms of cognition and the cognitive benefits that we have, it's not just saying like it's better memory, but it's memory, analytical thinking, planning, focus, concentration, decision making. I mean, many times, like I'm trying to work on different things and I can go for a run or I can do some kind of repetitive movement pattern, whether it's cardiovascular or weightlifting, and work out for a little bit. And actually it helps to clear my head and be able to help me come up with different solutions for what I'm trying to accomplish. The book also notes that reaction time is a fundamental index of overall integrity of the central nervous system, which I found interesting when you look at this. People who are physically fit seem to function more effectively than less physically active people on tasks involving cognitive demands. The outcome's particularly impressive in men and women in older age groups. So I thought that was kind of interesting when you look at this and you go, the book notes that kind of the reaction time that people have is tied to cognition. And they talk about, in terms of this research that they found here that shows up, it's referenced as number 71. When you look at like complex reaction time, where you have choice involved in the process, sedentary men showed a large age-related increases in reaction time, whereas physically active men showed little change by way of correlation or causation. Meaning, when you look at this, you have this ability to retain the integrity of the central nervous system that they note in the last sentence here. And it's a matter of, how do you have physical activity involved in the process? And when you look at different age populations, its effect on reaction time. And they tie reaction time to cognition. So when you look at this and you go to the first line up here, people who are 55 and older who typically show some degree of cognitive decline in some functions due to the aging process. They talk about how the aging brain itself, when you look at folks who get older, there's diminished capacity to do work. And it's diminished capacity to do work kind of broad-based globally across the body. But what they're correlating here is the reaction time to that functional ability. So when you look at this, you kind of go, all right, what we can do is we can work on reaction time. We can work on different skill sets for people who are elderly. And that will help those who are perhaps in the curve and are starting to suffer from some type of dementia or cognitive dysfunction. And believe me, it's something that does work. So I'm going to go ahead and pause here, and I'm going to jump out to the next presentation. Hold on.